I still remember the exact moment my world shattered into a million pieces. It was a Tuesday morning, and the sunlight was streaming through the kitchen window in that golden way that usually made me feel grateful to be alive. I was standing at the counter, wearing my favorite floral apron, the one with tiny roses embroidered along the hem. My hands were covered in flour because I had been making blueberry muffins, the kind my husband Richard always loved. The kind he used to say reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen back in Vermont. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:43. I remember glancing at the clock on the microwave, wondering who would be visiting so early on a weekday. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and walked to the front door, leaving a faint trail of flour footprints on the hardwood floor. When I opened it, a young man in a gray suit stood there holding a manila envelope. He asked if I was Margaret Elizabeth Harrison. I said yes, still smiling, still completely unaware that everything I knew about my life was about to crumble. He handed me the envelope with an apologetic expression and said the words that would echo in my mind for months to come. Legal documents. Divorce proceedings. Required signature. I stood there in the doorway, the envelope heavy in my hands, watching him walk back to his car. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was watering her petunias across the street.
She waved.
I waved back automatically, my body moving through the motions while my brain struggled to process what had just happened. I closed the door and leaned against it, staring at the envelope. My name was typed across the front in bold black letters. Inside, there were papers, official-looking documents with legal terminology that made my head spin. But what caught my attention, what made my breath catch in my throat, was the name listed as the respondent. Margaret Elizabeth Harrison. That was me. But the description, the person they were describing in those cold, clinical paragraphs, that wasn't me at all. Not anymore. The papers described someone I used to be. Someone who existed 20 years ago when Richard and I first got married. They talked about a woman who worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. They mentioned hobbies like tennis and book clubs. They referenced a person who apparently had no interest in personal growth or change. Reading through those pages felt like looking at a photograph of a stranger who just happened to share my name. I walked back to the kitchen in a daze. The muffins were still in the oven, filling the house with their sweet aroma. I turned off the timer and sat down at the kitchen table, spreading the papers out in front of me. My hands were shaking. Richard had filed for divorce. After 32 years of marriage, he wanted out. But the woman he was divorcing, the woman described in these legal documents, she didn't exist anymore. Let me explain something that most people don't understand about long marriages. You grow. You change. You become different versions of yourself over the decades. The Margaret who married Richard at 25 was ambitious, career-focused, always climbing the corporate ladder. She wore power suits and attended networking events. She played tennis every Saturday morning with clients and potential clients. She read business books and financial journals. She was efficient, organized, and always thinking 3 steps ahead. But that Margaret started fading away around 15 years ago. It happened gradually, so slowly that I didn't even notice at first. I started feeling empty despite all my professional success. The promotions didn't excite me anymore. The networking events felt exhausting rather than energizing. I would come home late from the office and look around our beautiful house, our perfectly decorated rooms, and feel absolutely nothing. Like I was living in a museum dedicated to someone else's life. The transformation began when my sister Linda was diagnosed with breast cancer. She was only 42, vibrant and full of life one moment, fighting for survival the next. I took a leave of absence from work to help her through chemotherapy. During those long days in hospital waiting rooms and quiet evenings at her house, something shifted inside me. I started questioning everything. What was I working so hard for? What did any of it mean? When was the last time I did something just because it brought me joy? Linda survived, thank God. But I came out of that experience a different person. I realized I wanted more from life than quarterly reports and performance reviews. I wanted to create things with my hands. I wanted to connect with people on a deeper level. I wanted to slow down and actually experience my days instead of rushing through them like items on a checklist. So, I made changes. Big ones. I left my job at the accounting firm, the one I had worked at for 18 years. Richard was supportive at first, or at least he seemed to be. He said I deserved a break, that we had enough savings for me to take some time to figure things out. I started taking pottery classes at the community center. I joined a women's circle that met twice a month to discuss books and philosophy and life. I began volunteering at the local animal shelter. I learned to paint with watercolors. I grew herbs in the backyard and started making my own bread from scratch. These changes brought me so much happiness. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt truly alive. I would wake up excited about the day ahead. I found joy in simple things, like the feel of clay between my fingers or watching the sunset from our back porch. I made new friends, women who shared my interests and values. We would have long conversations about art and meaning and purpose. I felt like I was finally becoming the person I was always meant to be. But Richard grew distant. At first, it was subtle. He would come home from his law firm and retreat to his study, claiming he had work to catch up on. Our dinner conversations became shorter, more superficial. He stopped asking about my day. When I would excitedly tell him about a new pottery technique I learned or a beautiful painting I had seen at a local gallery, he would nod politely, but I could see his mind was elsewhere. The distance grew wider. We stopped having our Sunday morning coffee ritual, where we would sit on the porch and talk about the week ahead. He started working later hours, even though he was a partner at his firm and could set his own schedule. When I suggested we take a vacation together, maybe visit that coastal town in Maine we had always talked about, he said he was too busy. Always too busy. I tried to include him in my new life. I invited him to come to a pottery show where some of my pieces were being displayed. He said he had a client dinner. I asked if he wanted to join me and some friends for a weekend retreat focused on mindfulness and meditation. He looked at me like I had suggested we join a circus. I cooked elaborate meals using herbs from my garden and recipes I had been experimenting with. He ate them quickly, barely tasting, his eyes on his phone the entire time. Looking back now, I can see that we were growing in completely different directions. But I didn't want to see it then. I kept telling myself that all marriages go through rough patches, that we just needed to reconnect, to find our way back to each other. I suggested couples therapy multiple times. Richard always had an excuse. Too expensive, even though money wasn't an issue. Too time-consuming, even though we spent our evenings sitting in the same house barely speaking. Not necessary because there wasn't really a problem, we were just busy. 6 months ago, things reached a breaking point. We were at a dinner party hosted by one of Richard's colleagues from the law firm. It was the kind of event I used to excel at, the corporate social gatherings where you made small talk and networked and presented your best polished self. But I had changed. I didn't want to pretend anymore. When someone asked what I did for a living, I said I was an artist and volunteer. The woman laughed, actually laughed, and said how nice it must be to have hobbies. Like my entire life's purpose was just a cute little pastime. Richard didn't defend me.
He didn't say anything.
He just stood there with his drink, looking uncomfortable. On the drive home, I finally confronted him. I asked why he let her dismiss me like that. Why he never talked about my art or my volunteer work with any pride or interest. Why he seemed embarrassed by the person I had become. That's when he said it. The sentence that I replay in my mind over and over, trying to understand how we got here. He said he missed the old Margaret. The one who was driven and ambitious. The one who understood his world, who could talk about legal cases and business strategies. The one who wore designer clothes to cocktail parties and impressed his colleagues. He said he felt like he didn't know me anymore, like I had turned into some completely different person. I told him that I was still me, just a more authentic version. That I was happier now than I had been in years. That growth and change were natural parts of life. He said it felt like I had abandoned our shared life, our shared goals. I asked what those goals were. He couldn't answer. Or maybe he didn't want to. We drove the rest of the way home in silence. After that night, we barely spoke. We became roommates sharing a house, passing each other in hallways, existing in parallel universes. I kept hoping he would come around, that he would see how much happier I was and want to understand why. I kept believing that love meant accepting someone's evolution, supporting their journey even when it took them in unexpected directions. But now, sitting at my kitchen table with divorce papers spread out in front of me, I realized I had been naive. Richard didn't want a wife who was evolving. He wanted the wife he married, frozen in time, never changing, always predictable. And when that wife transformed into someone new, someone more authentic and alive, he decided to leave. The worst part wasn't just that he was filing for divorce. It was how he was doing it. The legal documents described me as someone who had neglected marital responsibilities. They claimed I had abandoned my career without consulting him, as if my life decisions needed his approval. They suggested that my new interests and activities were frivolous and indicated a lack of maturity. Reading those words felt like being stabbed with tiny knives, each accusation a small wound that added up to something devastating. His lawyers had painted a picture of me as someone having a midlife crisis, acting irrationally, making poor choices. They framed my transformation as a negative thing, a problem that needed to be solved. They made it sound like I had lost my mind rather than found my soul. And the most painful part was knowing that Richard had approved all of this, had probably even helped craft this narrative. The man I had loved for 3 decades saw my growth as a betrayal. I sat there for hours, reading and rereading those papers. The muffins burned in the oven. I didn't care. Outside, life continued as normal. I could hear children playing in a yard nearby. A lawnmower buzzed in the distance. Mrs. Patterson's dog barked at a passing jogger. Everything was ordinary and normal, except my entire world had just collapsed. When Richard came home that evening, I was still at the kitchen table. The burned muffins sat on the counter, black and ruined. The divorce papers were neatly stacked in front of me. He walked in, saw me sitting there, and stopped. For a moment, just a brief flash, I saw something in his eyes. Guilt maybe, or regret. But then his lawyer face slid into place, professional and detached. He said we needed to talk. I almost laughed. After months of silence, after filing for divorce through a lawyer and having me served like a criminal, now he wanted to talk. But I stayed quiet and waited. He sat down across from me, not meeting my eyes. He said this was for the best. That we wanted different things from life now. That it would be better for both of us to move on. I asked him if he had read the papers, really read them. The description of who I supposedly was. He shifted uncomfortably and said his lawyer had prepared everything. I asked if he agreed with it, with the portrayal of me as someone neglecting responsibilities and acting irrationally. He said legal documents always exaggerated things, that it was just procedure. Just procedure. Like our marriage was a business transaction being dissolved. I told him the truth then, calmly and clearly. I said the woman he was divorcing didn't exist anymore. That Margaret, the corporate climber who lived for promotions and networking events, she was gone. She had been slowly disappearing for years, suffocating under the weight of expectations and shoulds. I told him I had become someone new, someone more authentic and alive. And if he couldn't love this version of me, then maybe he had never really loved me at all. Maybe he had just loved the idea of me, the accessory wife who made him look good at firm parties. Richard didn't say anything for a long time. Then he stood up and said his lawyer would be in touch about the details. He went upstairs to pack some things. I heard him moving around in our bedroom, opening drawers, zipping suitcases. 32 years of marriage reduced to the sound of belongings being divided. He left that night, staying at a hotel downtown. The house felt enormous and empty without him, but also somehow lighter. I walked through the rooms, touching surfaces, looking at photos on the walls. There we were on our wedding day, so young and hopeful. There we were on vacation in Hawaii, tanned and smiling. There we were at Richard's law firm holiday party, me in a black cocktail dress, him in a suit, both of us playing our roles perfectly. I took down that last photo and looked at the woman in the picture. She looked elegant and put together, successful and confident. But her eyes were empty. I could see it now, the hollowness behind the smile. That woman had everything she was supposed to want and felt nothing. That woman was dying inside, slowly and quietly, and nobody noticed because she was so good at pretending. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers and paperwork and difficult conversations. Richard's attorney was aggressive, painting me as unstable and irresponsible. They wanted me to accept a settlement that was frankly insulting, claiming that since I had left my career voluntarily, I wasn't entitled to much. They argued that my pottery and art were hobbies, not legitimate work. They suggested I could easily go back to accounting if I wanted to support myself. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia, who came highly recommended, was furious on my behalf. She said we would fight this, that I had contributed to the marriage in countless ways beyond a paycheck. That my decision to pursue a different path didn't negate decades of partnership. That Richard's narrative was not only insulting but legally flawed. But fighting meant going to court. It meant months of legal battles and depositions, and having our private life dissected by strangers. It meant spending money on lawyers that could be going toward building my new life. And most of all, it meant staying connected to Richard, staying locked in combat with someone I once loved, instead of moving forward. I thought about it constantly. What did I really want? Justice? Revenge? Validation? Or did I want freedom? Did I want to prove Richard wrong about who I had become? Or did I want to simply continue becoming that person without his approval or involvement? My friends from the women's circle were incredibly supportive. They reminded me that my worth wasn't determined by Richard's opinion or a court's judgment. That I had already won by finding authenticity and joy in my life. That sometimes the best revenge is living well. But they also said they would support me no matter what I decided, whether I fought or settled or something in between. Linda, my sister, had stronger opinions. She said Richard was being cruel and cowardly. That after everything I had done for him over the years, all the times I had supported his career and hosted his colleagues and been the perfect lawyer's wife, this was how he repaid me. She wanted me to fight, to take him for everything I could. She said I deserved it. But I wasn't sure what I deserved. I knew I deserved respect and kindness. I knew I deserved a partner who loved all of me, including the parts that were still growing and changing. But did I deserve half of Richard's retirement account and the house and spousal support? Legally, probably yes. But did I want those things if they came attached to bitterness and resentment? I started going to therapy, something I probably should have done years ago. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Chun, helped me process everything that had happened. She asked me questions that made me think deeply about my marriage and my transformation and what I wanted moving forward. She pointed out patterns I hadn't seen, ways I had made myself smaller over the years to fit into Richard's world. One session stands out in particular. Dr. Chun asked me to describe the happiest moment of my marriage. I thought about it for a long time. Finally, I talked about a random Tuesday evening about 10 years ago. We had just moved into our current house. Boxes were everywhere. Nothing was organized. We couldn't find anything. We ordered pizza and sat on the floor of the living room eating it straight from the box. We laughed about how ridiculous we looked, two successful professionals in their 40s sitting on the floor surrounded by chaos. In that moment, we were just us, no pretenses, no expectations, just two people starting a new chapter together. Dr. Chun asked me when the last time was that Richard and I had been just us, without the roles and expectations. I couldn't answer. I honestly couldn't remember. Somewhere along the way, we had stopped being two people in love and had become a successful couple, a team that looked good on paper, but had lost the connection that mattered. She asked me another question that changed everything. She said if I could go back and tell that Margaret from the pizza night anything, what would it be? I closed my eyes and thought about her. That woman full of hope about the future, unpacking boxes in a new house with her husband. What would I tell her? I would tell her to stay curious. To keep asking herself what brings joy. To never let anyone, including the man she loves, make her feel small for growing. To understand that transformation isn't betrayal. To know that the person she is at 45 will be different from who she is at 35, and that's not only okay, it's beautiful. To love herself enough to keep evolving. When I opened my eyes, Dr. Chun was smiling gently. She said it sounded like I had already figured out what I needed to do. Not about the divorce settlement or the legal battle, but about how I wanted to live the rest of my life. She was right. I met with Patricia the next day and told her I wanted to settle. Not because Richard deserved an easy out, but because I deserved a clean break. We negotiated terms that were fair without being vindictive. I would keep the house since I had put significant work into making it a home. We would split retirement accounts and savings. No spousal support because I didn't want to be financially tied to him. Patricia thought I was being too generous. Maybe I was. But I felt lighter after making that decision. The divorce was finalized on a gray October morning. Richard and I met at the courthouse with our lawyers. We signed papers. The judge declared our marriage dissolved. It took less than an hour. 32 years reduced to signatures and legal stamps. We walked out separately, not speaking, not looking at each other. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through downtown. The leaves were changing colors, brilliant reds and oranges and yellows. The world felt both sad and beautiful, ending and beginning at the same time. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a few minutes, looking at my house.
My house now.
Not ours.
Mine.
The first few months of being officially divorced were strange. I kept expecting Richard to walk through the door. I would cook dinner and automatically make enough for two. I would hear a sound and think it was him coming home. The house felt too quiet sometimes, the silence almost overwhelming. But slowly I adjusted. More than adjusted. I began to thrive. I turned Richard's old study into an art studio. I painted the walls a soft sage green and installed better lighting. I set up my easel by the window and organized my art supplies on shelves I built myself. Every morning, I would go in there with my coffee and spend a few hours creating. Some days I painted. Other days I worked on pottery pieces. Sometimes I just sat and sketched ideas in my journal. My art started getting recognition. A local gallery agreed to display some of my pottery pieces. They sold within a week. The gallery owner asked if I had more. I started taking commissions, creating custom pieces for people. It wasn't making me rich, but it was sustaining me financially and, more importantly, filling me with purpose and joy. The volunteer work at the animal shelter became a huge part of my life. I was there 3 days a week, helping care for abandoned and rescued animals. There was something deeply healing about that work, about giving love to creatures who had been neglected or mistreated. I fostered several dogs, helping them recover and find forever homes. One of them, a senior golden retriever named Biscuit who had been returned to the shelter 3 times, never got adopted. So I kept him. He sleeps on the couch in my studio while I work, occasionally huffing in his dreams. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during my corporate years. Women I had known in college, who had also gone through transformations of their own. We started having regular dinners, potluck style, where we would cook together and talk for hours. Real conversations about real things, not the surface-level chatter of networking events. These women became my chosen family, supporting me through the hard days and celebrating the good ones. Linda and I grew even closer. She was proud of me for standing up for myself, for choosing authenticity over comfort. She told me she had watched me slowly disappear during my marriage, becoming more muted and contained. Seeing me come back to life, she said, was like watching a flower bloom after a long winter. About a year after the divorce, something unexpected happened. I was at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning, buying fresh vegetables and homemade bread. I had become a regular there, knowing many of the vendors by name. I was talking to Maria, who sold the most incredible heirloom tomatoes, when someone called my name. I turned around and saw David. David Morrison, who I had known in college. We had been friends back then, part of the same social circle. He had been kind and funny, always making people laugh. After graduation, we had lost touch the way people do, moving to different cities and building different lives. He looked older, of course, but in a good way. Silver at his temples, laugh lines around his eyes. He was smiling at me with genuine warmth. We hugged awkwardly and then started talking, catching up on decades of life. He told me he had been married too, for 20 years, but his wife had passed away from ovarian cancer 3 years ago. He had 2 grown daughters. He had retired early from his career in engineering and now spent his time woodworking and hiking. We talked for over an hour right there in the farmer's market. The conversation flowed easily, comfortably. He asked what I had been up to, and I told him honestly about my career change, my art, the divorce, my new life. He listened without judgment, nodding and asking thoughtful questions. When I finished, he said something that stuck with me. He said I seemed truly happy, that there was a light in my eyes he didn't remember from college. That whatever path I had taken to get here, it clearly was the right one. We exchanged phone numbers. He called a few days later and asked if I wanted to get coffee. I said yes. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a weekend hike. The hike turned into him coming to my studio to see my art. He was genuinely impressed, asking about techniques and inspiration. He showed me some of his woodworking projects, beautiful furniture pieces made from reclaimed wood. David and I started spending more time together. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. We were both older, more cautious, carrying our own wounds and wisdom. But it was something real. He appreciated who I was now, not who I used to be. He celebrated my art and my volunteer work. He fit into my life without requiring me to change or diminish myself. One evening, about 6 months after we reconnected, we were sitting on my back porch watching the sunset. Biscuit was lying at our feet, snoring softly. David asked me if I ever regretted leaving my corporate career, if I ever missed that version of my life. I thought about it honestly before answering. I told him no. That losing that life had felt scary at first, like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. But it had also been necessary. That old Margaret, the one Richard had married and wanted me to stay, she was drowning in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow inside. The divorce had been painful, devastating even. But it had also freed me to fully become who I was meant to be. David nodded slowly. Then he said something I will never forget. He said sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is letting you go. That Richard, whether he meant to or not, had freed me to live authentically. That the divorce papers might have felt like an ending, but they were actually a beginning. He was right. Those papers, the ones that described someone who didn't exist anymore, had been my liberation. Richard had filed for divorce from a woman who was already gone, a woman I had outgrown. And in doing so, he had given me permission to fully embrace who I had become. I think about that Tuesday morning often, standing in my kitchen covered in flour, receiving those papers. At the time, it felt like the worst day of my life. But looking back now, I see it differently. It was the day I stopped waiting for someone else to validate my transformation. The day I realized my growth wasn't something that needed approval or permission. The day I understood that loving yourself sometimes means disappointing people who wanted you to stay the same. Richard remarried recently. I heard through mutual acquaintances. A woman who works at his law firm, another corporate professional. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No jealousy, no sadness, not even curiosity. Just a distant hope that they're happy, that she fits into his world in ways I no longer wanted to. As for me, I'm still evolving. My art continues to develop and change. I've started teaching pottery classes at the community center, sharing what I've learned with others. David and I are building something beautiful together, slowly and carefully. We talk about maybe traveling, seeing parts of the world neither of us has visited. We've discussed possibly moving in together eventually, though we're in no rush. Most importantly, I've learned that transformation isn't something that happens once and then stops. It's ongoing. I'm not the same person I was when the divorce was finalized, and I won't be the same person a year from now. That's okay. That's more than okay. That's life. Sometimes I pull out those old divorce papers and read through them, just to remind myself how far I've come. The woman described in those documents really doesn't exist anymore. She hasn't for a long time. And honestly, I don't miss her. I honor what she accomplished and the path she walked. But I don't want to be her again. I'm grateful now for everything that happened, even the painful parts. The divorce forced me to stand fully in my truth, to own my choices and my transformation without apologizing. It taught me that you can't make someone understand your journey if they're not willing to walk beside you. It showed me that real love supports growth, celebrates evolution, and never asks you to stay small. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Biscuit is beside me, gray-muzzled and content. My studio light is on, waiting for me to return to the painting I started this morning. Tomorrow I'm teaching a pottery class, then having lunch with Linda, then maybe taking a walk with David through the nature preserve. It's a simple life, far from the corporate success and status I once pursued. But it's mine, authentically and completely mine. Richard filed for divorce from someone who doesn't exist anymore. And in doing so, he gave that person permission to fully disappear, making room for someone real, someone alive, someone finally free. For that, despite everything, I'm grateful. Because the woman I am now, standing in her truth, creating beauty, loving authentically, she's worth more than any version of myself I pretended to be.